I'm joined on the panel today and very grateful for participation of Ivy Kimani, who's the Head of Brand and Consumer Insights at AmCham. So Ivy, welcome. And we also have Fred Marimi, who's the Managing Director for Centrum Investments. Fred, hi. And of course, Wolfgang, who delivered those powerful remarks. So I want to kick off the discussion with Ivy. Ivy, you're with AmCham. AmCham is growing and expanding in Kenya as well as in other markets. Can you perhaps share with us a little bit about what you're doing, but also the fact that, Wolfgang presented, the story about this young demographic dividend, a rapidly growing youth population in Africa, in Kenya, the Gen Z dominance. What are the implications for your business as AmCham?
Okay, great. So AmCham is a pay-as-you-cook company. We are in the clean cooking space. Wolfgang explained that food is one of the top spenders in this, and really in clean cooking. Obviously, I think we all know that it's a really big pandemic in Africa. It's about 900 million households not having access, and people not having access to clean cooking. Now, in AmCham, we are serving the vulnerable, but actually it's really the poor, so people between $0 to $5 spending. What does AmCham really do? What makes us distinctive from a typical LPG company? Why are we calling ourselves a pay-as-you-cook company? We walk into these consumer households because primarily they're using charcoal, they're using firewood, they're using kerosene. So they're using solutions like this primarily because affordability is the biggest barrier. So how are we breaking that? We give them a full LPG cylinder of 13 kilos, right? So the typical LPG that you use in your homes. We put a smart meter on that, and we give them a 2-burner stove, something they would never have been able to access, right? The cost of that is anything to like 7,000 Kenya shillings. Now, what we do is we do this at very little upfront cost. So all they need to pay us is literally 500 shillings to get started. Okay, and that's a one-off cost. And then what we then do is we allow them to pay as they cook. That means what? You want to make your breakfast, you put in 20 shillings, and you can make your tea for 10 shillings. You want to make dinner, you put in 20 shillings into your smart meter, and all this is through mobile money, right? I mean, this is Kenya, so mobile money is really what we're using. And it means you can be able to cook any amount of money that you actually have. So that's really what our solution is doing. And we are now in 400,000 households. I think that just gives you an idea of what AmCham is, right? And who we are serving. Now, the trends that we are seeing is we are really serving younger and younger homes. So we are mostly in urban and peri-urban homes. We're seeing, you talked about the Gen Z, right? And we're tending to see that homes where people have young children are a lot more receptive to these solutions. Mothers who have children who are infants are a lot more receptive to health factors, right? I will not use charcoal, so I'm willing to actually take on LPG. As we go further out into the regions, we start to see that we struggle with things like relevance, because then you're really in a place where she has access to firewood right outside her house and you're competing with a free fuel. But more importantly, all of my neighbors are using firewood, and we've been fine for years. So relevance is a huge barrier for us, right? But it's a slow burn, I think, in the regions. But then in the urban areas, we see a lot of receptivity. So I think Gen Zs and younger families, we see a lot of acceptance with our solution. I think that's one of the key things, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Ivy. Fred, Wolfgang presented some interesting facts about about 139 million African consumers will be added in the next decade. And we're seeing this, this phenomenon of the rising middle class, and also in Africa. How does that resonate with you and what you're doing in your business?
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Fred Marimi, and I think maybe just quickly, I work with a company called Centrum Investments. It's a publicly listed company, been around since 1967. We invest across different sectors: financial services, consumer, manufacturing, automotive, real estate as well. So we do get to see quite a bit in terms of what's happening. The business of investment is about trying to make bets on the future. So we try to understand what we are seeing currently and then try to project how that plays out into the future. So very useful analysis and tips by Wolfgang. So I think we are seeing a number of things, and Safaricom did announce their results, half-year results just yesterday. So I was looking at their M-Pesa transactions as a proxy for what's going on in the economy, the mobile money. And across all their different revenue streams, voice, M-Pesa, messaging, data, they're all up. In terms of number of consumers, that's also growing. So it does confirm that indeed there's growth. What I did find interesting was my quick arithmetic was the volume of transactions has actually increased, so has the value, but on average, comparing 3 years ago, the value of average M-Pesa transactions was 1,900 shillings. This year, the average was about 1,200 shillings. So there's been a decline in the average value per transaction on the M-Pesa. So it tells me a number of things. Number one, of course, it's good that there's growth, as confirmed, but the transaction patterns are changing. So people are doing smaller and smaller transactions. So it does tell me that looking to the future, that even as we look to where to invest, looking as to where we expect consumers to spend, they're going for lower and lower value transactions. So the spending is happening, it's just the pattern in terms of transaction, absolute transaction value is what is decreasing. I think the other thing, and maybe more anecdotal, is I think also quite a bit of the transactions, or people have shifted what they're spending on. So for instance, this is just purely anecdotal. My local barber tells me that fewer people are getting haircuts. So in fact, one time I was there at 6:30 p.m. And we were the second customers of the day at 6:30 p.m. Yeah. So the spending is happening, but people have shifted. So where the opportunities to do it myself, people are doing it themselves. So again, as you're thinking about where to spend on, where to invest, if now your competitor is almost your customer. So where the barber would have offered hair shaving services, people are buying the shaving machines themselves and doing it themselves. So you could think about, are you in a business where your customer is your competitor? Because if that's the case, then of course, that future is not too bright. The other thing, and then just speaking to demographics, again, purely anecdotal, when I was 20, which is exactly a quarter of a century ago, if I had 200 shillings in my pocket on a Friday, it was obvious what I was going to spend it on. A beer was 50 shillings, so that's 4 beers, and the 200 shillings is done. Now, if I adjust that for inflation 25 years later, the good thing is you can use a unit of beer. A beer is now 250 shillings. So if someone has 1,000 shillings and is 20, now they're not spending that money on beer. They've now shifted. Number one is airtime, which explains why Safaricom growth numbers are coming in. Then number two, unfortunately, is sports betting. So that's again a big competitor for any product that one is thinking about, in terms of, even as we are looking at the demographics in Africa, maybe this is just a Kenya story, but probably spreads across Africa, but the other big competitor now is sports betting. And that is now affecting, if you look at numbers like AIA-N, the brewery, the absolute volumes are declining. So the people who are my age, or then 20, are not doing enough to drink, like we did, and supported industry. Yeah, so I think those are some of the patterns that I think we just need to be alive to. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Fred. Wolfgang, you presented, I think, the top cities in Africa led by Cairo and Alexandria and the like. You know, so it seems like there's a large urban phenomena that's also kind of behind fueling and driving this growth. But what about the rural informal economies and populations that are a little bit less vulnerable. What potential is there for that segment of the consumer? And apart from us focusing on everybody entering into the consumer class, but there's a huge opportunity for inclusion and targeting specifically in that low income segment too.
Thank you so much, and it's so nice to be with Ivy and Fred here. And we also, by the way, working closely with Ivy on data modeling, and I think your example is fantastic of what I tried to show, that you can, with this low-cost transaction platform, enter many more segments to reach the poor. And cooking is obviously one of them, clean cooking, and it would go to many, I don't know, I'm sure there could be smart fridges in the future and smart washing machines, and so you can actually lower these thresholds through the work that you're doing. And yeah, Fred, I think but your barber did a good job with you, so I think it's okay. But very cool insights that you have. So a few things, I think clearly the opportunities are more for including the rural consumer, but we shouldn't overestimate the opportunities. And I think it depends on the sector also. I always love to use this anecdote because I know Michael Joseph quite well, and I even convinced him once to write a paper, which he typically doesn't do because he's only an operational guy, as you know, Ivy. But we wrote a paper together on M-Pesa, and it was not yet as fashionable. And he then told me, Wolfgang, I'm very pleased to tell you that 20% of my customers never make a phone call. And so that's very strange why you're saying this. And then he says, yeah, but they receive phone calls. And so that's another logic that you should, there's a two-way street in some sectors. Obviously, if it goes to telecommunication, it may go to some extent in banking, that if you have a network and if you include everybody, then everybody benefits, rural and urban together. But a few, I think, insights on, in the end, the action is in the city, and we should not glorify rural life. I'm actually trying to be quite provocative here. I think people always think rural life is it's wonderful. No, rural life is horrible, except for some rich people who have some nice houses there. Rural life is typically horrible, and we just talk to young girls or boys, they want to have more action, they want to have more empowerment. If you think of even pure human violations and other things, that's why people move to the cities. People are not forced to move to cities. There's a few exceptions, like in civil wars, like in Angola, but in Kenya, people are not forced to move to cities. In case you moved to your parents, it was not because you were forced, but you thought there's a more opportunity in the city, and then people don't leave. They still struggle and hustle, but they don't leave. So I think that fundamental logic we should accept. But then because of demographic momentum, and it's explicitly demographic momentum, because fertility is down, even in Kenya fertility is down quite dramatically. And think of yourself, I think family size, at least when I did the calculations 10 years ago, Nairobi had fewer children than I have. I have 3 children, so Nairobi has 2.9. I think Kenya is now below 2.5. But why is there population growth? Because we are all, and you are all alive, and you live longer, and there's just more people. There's more people in their 50s. Again, as I said, the Gen Xers or the baby boomers have fewer because some of us died, but with the millennials of you, it will be different. Your fellows will not die, fortunately, and so there'll be more and more people. What does this all mean? It means there's more density in Kenya. So cities grow naturally, and then Thika becomes part of the urban sprawler system, and that's why this rural-urban divide, again, it depends on countries, but if you think of Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, the size is not massive of these countries, but the population is growing, so there's more and more density, and then a village becomes actually soon a mini-city, and that itself creates an opportunity. So I think one needs to think in this dynamic way, but again, important is consumers are different, and if you have to make choices, then you need to start in the city.
Okay, very provocative, Wolfgang, but yeah, we'll go by the numbers. Great, I'm going to actually open. I know we've got a hard stop at 9:30, so I do want to actually make this more interactive, engaging. So I'm going to open to the floor for questions, reactions to the presentation, questions, comments. So please put your hand up, and please also just introduce yourself before you can ask your question or pose your comment. Yeah.
Okay, hi, my name is Mishai Bonina. I work with CKL Africa in agriculture. I'm provoked by that rule. The thing about the city people, might make sense in numbers, but people are going to have to eat. And so food is going to have to come from somewhere. So maybe that will change the rule, right? So that's one query. But the second one we thought is when you look at the cities, Joburg was below Nairobi. It was way down. So I was kind of surprised by the South African. Johannesburg and Cape Town I'd have thought would be, pretty higher up in terms of spending, but they didn't seem to appear there. So that's a query.
Okay, maybe we'll take 2 more questions and then we'll turn to response. There's a hand up here.
Hi, I think my question again is to Wuhan. My name is Kamone Inwane, I work with AIA-N. The thing that I don't see in this data, and I'm wondering how much it influences, is the African culture. How much does that make us different, even if we're in the cities? How much does that impact how we're spending, how we're making decisions? Is it reducing? Is it going up?
Morning, my name is Yuri Salins. I work at a fund management company called Apollo Asset Management. I wonder if we can actually just go to the slides. There's a particular slide where you have a pie chart where you show, if I could just...
The one with Asia as well? With China, India? Or?
You show the next 10 years. India, 439 million, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, can you project it if over the next decade, will Africa presumably start pushing more middle class into that equation? And then, given Fred sitting there, presumably if you had to make an investment bet, India is the next place to sort of put your money in, because consumables, FMCG and all of that would be, I guess that's what will push the economy, right? I don't know if you can get the slide.
Okay, but whilst I think we're pulling up the slides as you will help.
Yeah.
So Wolfgang, do you want to
Yeah,
start?
I'll kick it off, but I hope, I think Fred can come in, especially on the culture question. I think Fred actually alluded to some of this. But yeah, no, Mushari, Africa, the cities is easy. The chart was growth, so not the base. So Joburg and Cape Town still you can make more money there. And if you just think of riding the wave of the growth, South Africa, unfortunately, and I covered South Africa for the World Bank after Kenya, has economic challenges and has less dynamic than Kenya. Less demographic dynamic, less economic dynamic. And if you bring the two together, you have strong, and you have also more, because of demographic dynamic, just bigger Nairobi, so that's both, and you don't have so much bigger Cape Town or Johannesburg. On the other point, though, I think and obviously it's nice that you raised it because we can have a good discussion on agriculture, and we discuss it quite often with the MasterCard Foundation, with whom we work on jobs. So we all have to eat, and we all, in the rich countries, I can tell you, eat well. So, but the agriculture sector is very small, but it's highly productive. Think of Australia, think of the US, think of France. So I challenged the MasterCard team yesterday on this, to say, let's look at a good African comparator. Look at the ideal. What is this? Mauritius. Let's use that one. What's the share of, Mauritius, what's Mauritius, right? It's a small place, it's successful, but it's agriculture, right? It's sugar plantation. How many people in Mauritius work in agriculture? Any guess? 100,000? That would be out of a population of 2 million adults, this would be like 1 million, so that would be 10%. 2.3%. In Mauritius, 2.3. But the Mauritians eat well. They eat as well as you guys. So now, again, then agriculture doesn't certainly, I think the key is we need agriculture, but we need different agriculture. I'm very impressed by farmers, right? They wake up early, they have to work every day. But then there's a reason why Bidco became big. I guess you're Kenyans, so you know Bidco, right? But Bidco is an agro-industry complex, and that employs many people. And it also employs accountants, and it employs obviously plumbers and whatever you need in these factories. So yeah, that's the future, right? So that's I think one should marry both. But yeah, the traditional agriculture, is nowhere as the future, and we should accept that we need different agriculture, but we need agriculture. On culture, I'll kick it off, but then we can go further before we go to the cool chart here. So, don't be surprised that actually money and age still determine a lot over time, across countries. And people, that's a bit our method, and we can, Sajin who's on the other table can talk through this a little more, is just think of the money available, and people who spend the money and they spend on something. And it's very unlikely if you are a poor person in some other country that you don't spend on food. You have no choice. There's not much. There are some spend on ugali and the others spend on rice in Vietnam, but you have to eat. And the same on housing. And some of this is actually not much culture in that. You just have to live your life, and then there's certain things you spend on. You spend on transport, as you do today. So there's some logic in this. And it's actually, when you do the data as we do, then you can actually create interesting patterns, but it's hard to calculate because there's so many variables that come into that. Now there are some cases, and I can, not just in food differences. For example, I know quite well this personal care market because we're working with the Colgates and the L'Oreals of the world. So two countries that are very similar, like Spain and Portugal, they spend differently on beauty. So I think Spain spends a bit more than Portugal. That does happen, but I wouldn't start there because the rest drives much more. Having said that, there's shifts, right? This betting, which Fred spoke about, so there's a shift. But then it's not cultural, because unfortunately betting now is very popular everywhere, and it's a very big business. This is a little interesting anecdote. We're working with a company that actually could be interesting for Fred, and then you do e-banks. It's like a Safaricom. I mean, in terms of drive and ambition, like Safaricom almost, 2 billion value now. It's a Brazilian bank that wants to business to business in emerging markets. And they'll be working with them and helping them in Africa. But how do you make the money? Is people, using these gamers in China, in Kenya, doing some games, but they need to transact the money. And they need their platforms, easy platforms, and Safaricom doesn't offer this to Brazil to Kenya or Kenya to Vietnam. And that's what they do. Just to use an illustration how what Fred said and what you said still have a broader pattern. But yeah, people are a bit different, but I would always start with the money and the air, with the income level and the age, because that allows you to predict most. So on your question on India and Africa, this is the Africa number. Huh? Now, you don't have to eat into the cake. Cake can also get bigger, but Africa will not overtake in total India this decade. It's not possible. Because India is on this momentum, and it's partly because so many people are close to the threshold. If you take this Nestle analogy, you need to be at, say, $10 to become $12. We always hope for miracles, but somebody who's in a poor village in Mandera won't be living in a rich house here next year. It's very unlikely. The person needs to, you move up, and then maybe your children, if you're lucky, then go to the next level. And so there is some logical pattern. India has, the way we talked about India 30 years ago or 20 years ago was we talk about Kenya today. Hopeful, but not there yet. Now India seems to be there now. Still 800 million Indians are not consumer class. 500 million plus are now. 500 plus, so that gives us 1.4 billion. So it's still a 2-to-1 ratio that are not there yet. But a lot of catch up, and that's happening now. China is the opposite. That's why Chinese don't jump so much anymore in the middle class, because many are there already. But other Chinese move up. Does this answer your question here?
Okay, yeah, since you prompted me, I think maybe on the culture question, and I don't know too much about it, but and I wonder how it's captured in the data. So I guess the typical 50-year-old in the West, like yourselves, I think one of the differences I see is, and at least from what you're told, if you have a 20-year-old child, that 20-year-old child is probably fending for themselves. And if you have an 80-year-old parent, you are not necessarily taking care of that parent. I think in Africa we see it differently. The 50-year-old will still be housing and feeding their 20-year-old child, while still taking care of their 80-year-old parent. So I don't know how that reflects in the spending patterns. And then for us in Kenya, in Africa, where we have, I think now 70% of our population is below the age of 35. And of those who should be in the working population, you have 70% unemployed, meaning that they've been taken care of by someone, presumably their parents. I just wonder what that would mean in future. for us in Africa. When I try and project that out, because at some point then the parents will no longer be earning. So yeah, maybe back to you.
No, just very briefly, so just again, I'm happy to have a deeper session on methodology, and I think we're doing with the ASPEN team tomorrow something with a group. The good news is there is more and more data, but you need to make sense of it. So it doesn't capture in the data. So one extreme case, and again, you can call it cultural or just country circumstance, healthcare. In some countries, and elderly care, right? In some countries, it's captured through the social security system. And there's more and more who take care of elderly, but not the way it is in Kenya, because there is a system and you have a social protection system. But so if you think of healthcare, which again is a big topic in the US, in America, I think is number 2 spending. But America is the same, a bit wealthy, let's say, like Japan or in even Luxembourg, which is a very rich country. It's not, because they have a system that then have public spending on healthcare. So the data captures that. So that's the key number. So yeah, if you think of, you can call it cultural or whatever it is, but yeah, that is covered in the data.
I just want to chime in on what Kamini was asking earlier around the cultural aspect and what we're seeing in our business. When we see, I talked about age, so of course younger families, we see a lot more adoption. However, there's an aspect of money. We are starting to realize that when we go into homes where women earn an income, those homes tend to adopt to a clean cooking fuel faster. She's able to decide the money she will put that day and will be able to cook that day, right? The man no longer becomes a decision maker in the kitchen or the fuel that will cook that day. So we're seeing in those kind of homes, we see even better retention. So there's an aspect of when women become a bit more empowered, when they have a bit more spending power, we see better outcomes, right? And we are seeing that in the urban areas and even in the peri-urban areas. So much so that even for our sales force, as they go into homes, it is one of the vetting questions we ask. Not because we will deny you the solution when we come to your home, but we know at the back of our minds that when we see this data, we see homes where the woman is working, they will use this solution more often. So I think that's some of the aspects where culture will probably not play so much as money and empowerment financially.
Okay, brilliant. So we're going to wrap up the session. I think concluding remarks, 2 minutes. But Wolfgang, if you could just provide an overview, if the colleagues would like to work with the data, how can they actually interact with World Data Lab and how can they use the data? And then, Fred and Ivy, just closing remarks.
Yeah. No, thank you. Let me say one other thing which I wanted to highlight earlier is, it's a bit like hopefully like Ivy's and Fred's business. We feel we are onto something and we want to grow, and we have also feel that for us Africa is a competitive advantage because people think there's poor data and it's actually not as good as elsewhere. And because of my background, Reshma's background, and others, we think we cracked it to some extent. We still need to, like Google or Apple, always keep improving, and you're doing, but we have something for every country. So that's why also how we approach global companies to say we can close the Africa data gap for you. But it also means we need great people, and we are going next phase. And so if you are interested or know of somebody who would love to run our Africa operation from here, let me know, or let Reshma know, Sajni, because we want to, be even bigger and have somebody who can, because Reshma will relocate to the US and oversee all of our North America and global impact business continuing, so we need somebody strong here as well. Having said that, we have there's 2 ways to work with us. One is we have an impact side of the business, and we're doing, building with many public partners, being the Gates Foundation or MasterCard Foundation, these data models that you can check out that are public, and just please play with the data. We launched a pretty popular piece called the World Emissions Clock that's now being prominently again at COP in the next few weeks. And then second, we have a commercial side. That's the example where we work also with AmGas, and then we have advisory inside, but also data. And if you look at our platform, you see our World Data Pro platform that the data I showed is taken from, and it goes much deeper, much more granular. Then it's a question of which sector you're in. If you need the education module, or if you need the FMCG module, or the healthcare module, or so it goes into every segment. of the data that we produced. And yeah, we'd love to work with you as well. So just go to the platform, but otherwise contact one of the three of us.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Fred, and then Ivy. Yeah, final
Sure.
remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the data. I think for me, I'd say I'm very excited about Africa and their prospects. When you look at population projections going forward by 2050, they say a quarter of the world will be Chinese, a quarter of the world will be Indian, then a quarter of the world will be African, and then the rest of the world, Americans, Europeans, etc., will only be a quarter. So if you're not in Africa, you're missing out on a big piece of the world. I think where the data will be very useful is then to then begin to understand what will be the spending patterns by that time, particularly given that we may still not necessarily have overcome all the poverty challenges, but there'll definitely be spending. So I think where the data can assist us is where people will be spending, and we then invest and deploy capital into areas where we expect this quarter of the population, of the world population to be spending. Thank you.
Great. I think from our end, us and GAS, we're just very excited to be working with people like World Data and just showing us the possibilities that data can give us and be able to eliminate the problem. I think we are excited to be working on one of the most pressing problems of our times, frankly, and its impact on climate change. We are really at the center of impact. It's really not difficult to find the impact that we do. So I think seeing the data and the kind of data that World Data is going to be able to illuminate to more people like you, let's see what the future holds. But thank you, Wolfgang and Rashna, quite insightful.
Thank you so much. I think a big round of applause to our panelists.